Okay, so let's continue with our next video in our practice questions of AWS Certified Developer Associate exam. So let's go to the question number 21. A developer needs to write an AWS CloudFormation template on a local machine. So there is just one developer who want to add some AWS CloudFormation template and he wants to write template on local machine and want to deploy on the AWS. Okay, what must the developer do to complete this task? You could see he wants to deploy that CloudFormation stack from his local machine to the AWS. So if you are trying to do something from the local machine to the AWS, you need some credential of the AWS, right? So what we have to do? Install the AWS CLI, yes. Configure the AWS CLI by using IAM username and password. So this looks wrong. Using SSH key also wrong. So generally when you configured the AWS CLI, you generally configured using access key and the secret key. So this looks correct. And the fourth option is SDK. SDK is generally for the when you are trying to do something using the code. So this looks wrong. So C is the correct answer. Next question. A developer is working on a web application. So there is a web application that runs on the ECS. And that web application uses Amazon DynamoDB table to store data. So that is web application. Maybe they are running some operation which is trying to write some data to the DynamoDB. The application performs a large number of read requests against a small set of table data. So maybe let's suppose there are only 100 records in the table, but application read those 100 records multiple times. So there's a large number of read requests. How can the developer improve the performance? You could see there is when there is small set of data. So is it not good to go to the DynamoDB for each and every operation? Go to the DynamoDB, read it, go to the DynamoDB, read it, the same and same data again and again. So better to store the data somewhere in the cache. So in the DynamoDB, there is a one cache service called DEX cluster, so which is going to store the data. So let's go through the option. Create an Amazon Elastic cache. So we need to select two options to improve the performance. So how you are going to improve the performance once you cache those results? So create an Elastic cache cluster and configure the application to cache. So this looks correct because you can cache the data in the Elastic cache. Create a DEX cluster, configure the application to use DEX. This looks also correct. Create the application to make strongly consistent read request against the DynamoDB table. Doesn't look correct. Increase the read capacity of the DynamoDB table. Increasing the read capacity, like we don't want to increase the read capacity, we want to improve the performance. Increase the read capacity, also increase the cost. Enable adaptive capacity. So this looks wrong. So to me, A and B looks okay. So let's reveal the question. They have mentioned only B, but the question says we need to choose two. So A and B will be the correct answer. If we have to choose only one, then B will be the correct answer. Okay, question number 23. A developer needs to use an Amazon DynamoDB to store customer orders. So we are storing customer order on DynamoDB. The developer's company requires all customer data to be encrypted at rest with the key that the company generates. So because we are storing the data and the company wants, when you store the data, all the data should be encrypted, but it should be encrypted with the key which company generates. So it should not be the default key. So what developer should do to meet this requirement? Create the DynamoDB table with encryption set to none. Totally wrong. When you set the encryption set to none, then how you can encrypt the data? Store the key by using AWS KMS. So KMS is a service to store the key. Choose an AWS KMS customer managed key, which looks correct because here you want to use the key which company generate, that is the customer managed key. And when you create the table, you have to choose that key while creating the table so that whenever the data is going to store, it gets in. Provide the ARN, which looks B looks correct. Choose the key, store the key in the KMS looks correct. create the DynamoDB table with default encryption. Default encryption, no. We have to choose the customer managed key. Store the key using KMS, okay. Store an AWS KMS managed key, looks wrong because we want to use the customer managed key. So B looks correct. Let B look correct. Question number 24. A developer is creating a solution to track and account Amazon S3 buckets over time. So there are some S3 bucket. The developer want to create a solution to track S3 buckets. The developer has created AWS Lambda function that run on schedule. So there is a Lambda function, it runs on schedule basis. The function, what function will do is function will list the S3 buckets. Okay, but all S3 bucket exist on day one, day two, day three, something like that. And then it is going to store those lists in DynamoDB table. Okay. The developer receives a permission error. So when you see permission error, something related with the IAM, right? The developer receives permission error when the developer runs the function with the basic execution role. Definitely, if you run the Lambda function with the basic execution role, then you are going to get the error. And the Lambda needs two access. One is to access for the S3 bucket. One is to write access to the DynamoDB table. But Lambda basic execution permission means just to create a CloudWatch logs, store the CloudWatch logs group and log stream. So definitely this permission, if you are going to use this IAM policy or permission, you will get the permission error. Okay. So what combination of permission developer use to resolve this error? Cross account wrong. Permission of the Lambda function to list bucket, yes. Permission for the Lambda function to write to DynamoDB, yes. Permission for Amazon S3, so no. We don't want permission for Amazon S3. Permission, no. So B and C looks correct. Question number 25. A company is adding items to the Amazon DynamoDB table from an AWS Lambda function that is written in Python. So similarly, Lambda function which is running and that function is trying to write something into DynamoDB. A developer needs to implement a solution that inserts record in DynamoDB table and performs automatic retry when the insert fails. So there's a Python code. So when you're trying to write something into DynamoDB table, there could be chances that transition got failed. So the developer wants some kind of solution. If transition got failed, insert got failed, it should automatically retry. So what should you will do? So generally, when this kind of something will come now, like you have to retry kind of logic, then better use the SDK. SDK means like Boto3 kind of module, because these modules like provide back of exception functions facilities, which is basically to retry if something is going to fail or if exception come occur. So configure the Python code to run the AWS CLI shell wrong. Can call the put item from Python by using HTTP API wrong. Uh, glue AWS glue totally wrong. So you can use the AWS Boto3 because Boto3 has the inbuilt functionality uh, to handle this kind of things. As an example, if your insert is going to fail, then it is going to retry basically the back of exception. So D looks correct. Question number 26. A developer is writing an AWS Lambda function. Okay. The developer wants to log key events that occur during the Lambda function and include a unique identifier to associate the events with the specific function invocation. So when you are trying to invoke the Lambda, the developer wants to log that record. All right. So we are usually log the records of Lambda, CloudWatch log group. But when the log you are going to print there, you want to include the unique identifier. So how you will do? Obtain the request identifier from the Lambda context object. So when you define the Lambda, there are two variables, event and context. Event is basically which you are going to pass, that the JSON. Context is the default variable which is going to provide some functions. So context object looks correct because that is going to provide like something like AWS request ID variable. Architect the application to write the logs to the console looks correct. And event object totally wrong. Event object totally wrong. Context object, using the context object you can get the request identifier. Here they have mentioned you can write the logs to the file. Why you are going to implement this complicated architecture like to file? Better just to the console. So A looks correct. Question number 27. A company experienced partial downtime during the last deployment of new application. So company did some kind of a deployment on the AWS and they experienced partial downtime. AWS Elastic Beanstalk split the environment's Amazon EC2 instances into batches and deployed a new version one batch at a time after taking them out of service. So when you did the deployment on AWS Elastic Beanstalk, so what it will do is, so let's suppose your application is running on 2 EC2. So they deploy your application only on the one EC2 once. So if you deploy only on the one EC2 instance, it means whatever the user trying to access that EC2, they will get some downtime, right? They will get some error, but the other EC2 still up. So that's why the partial downtime. Therefore, full capacity was not maintained. Definitely correct. The developer plans to release a new version. So now the developer wants to plan a new version of deployment, but now this time they were looking to maintain full capacity. So they said, now we want to maintain a full capacity, so there should not be a downtime. All right. So which development policy they will use? All at once, rolling with additional batch, immutable. All at once, totally wrong. All at once, let's go there are two EC2 instances. Do the deployment on all the EC2 instances, so the all the EC2 instances will get down. So totally wrong. B is totally wrong. Rolling, uh, rolling like first instance, then second instance, rolling with additional batch, you will spin up one EC2 instance extra. Immutable is correct. Let's go two EC2 instance. You are going to create a two more EC2 instance and you are not going to touch the existing one. And on the new two EC2 instance, you are going to do the deployment and then do the health checks. One that is healthy, then you are going to stop the earlier two EC2 instance. So it means you are maintaining the full capacity and minimize the impact of the failed deployment. So immutable looks correct. All right, so immutable looks correct. Question number 28. A company is providing services to many downstream consumers. Okay, so there are some consumers who are trying to some consume something. Each consumer may connect to one or more service. Okay, this has resulted in a complex architecture. So there are, let's put 10 services and consumer is trying to access all the services. So it will very complex uh, architecture that is difficult to manage and doesn't scale. The company needs a single interface. So when it is called a single interface, what you will do? Lambda, totally wrong. Lambda is just a like serverless function. X-ray, no, it's just to performance of monitoring. SQS is to decouple your application, right? Imagine API gateway, correct. So gateway is a single interface point of contact. So D looks correct. When a developer tries to run an AWS code build project, so they were running some AWS code build, it raises an error because of the length of the environment variable exceeds. So maybe in the code build project, there should be some length limit. Okay, the environment variable length should be of particular this size. So they are getting some error. It is an error because the length of the environment variable exceeds the limit of the obtained maximum character. So if you are get this error, what you will do? So if you are get this error, and it means you are storing the variable in that configuration, so you need to store that variable somewhere else, right? So add the export LC language command, U2F command. So this looks wrong. Cognito is for authentication. Update the service to use an Amazon S3 bucket. No, so S3 bucket is just for the objects, not to store the environment variables. AWS system manager parameter to store large number. Yes, that looks correct. SSM is a service to store the environment variables. So D looks correct. Question number 30. A development team decides to adopt a continuous integration CI/CD process using AWS code pipeline and code commit for a new application. So they are doing some kind of a CI/CD using code pipeline and code commit. However, management wants a person to review and approve the code before deploy to the production. So if you have ever worked with the code pipeline, so there are some stages like dev stage, deploy to dev, deploy to staging, deploy to production. So generally before the production, there should be a manual approval stage. So the same thing they want. The person wants to approve the code before it deploy to the production. So how they will do? They have to just add the stage. That's it. Uh, Use AWS SCS to send an email to the approver. Okay. Develop a simple application that allow approver looks invoke a lambda. No, you don't want to invoke a lambda. If approved, add a approved tag. No. Add an approval step. Looks correct. Add approval step to code commit. No, we need to add approval step to the code pipeline. Add an approval action, okay, to the pipeline. Yes. Configure the approval action to publish the SNS topic, then approval is required. Yes, looks correct. Because you, when the pipeline is waiting, so whoever is approval, they should get some kind of a notification email. All right. So D looks correct. So that's it. That's the end of the video. We have covered like 10 AWS certified developer associated questions. In the next video, we will going to cover the next 10. So thank you.